Walsh.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach, and thank you, Minister, for being here this morning. And I understand the constraints you have in being able to discuss this matter. So there's just a couple of broad things. Among the reasons given for taking the appeal against the Apple tax ruling and the refusal to collect the money was that it may not all belong to Ireland. But in light of Commissioner Vestager's comment that the large majority of unpaid taxes would be due in Ireland and not to another European country, do you now accept that this can no longer be offered as a valid reason to go ahead with the appeal? And in particularly, I'll cite France and Germany, who have clearly stated that they have no claim whatsoever to this tax. So can we take that off the table at this stage as being a reason why we should appeal?
No, we can't, because it was in the original decision. If you read the full decision by the Commission, they referenced this as a possibility. And there was an accompanying press statement which also said some of the 13 billion, if that's the correct figure, might be due to other countries. And at ECOFIN, two countries, Spain and Austria, publicly said that they were considering making claims. And it had become a political issue in Austria around the time of that first ECOFIN meeting, where the opposition was demanding that the government would seek claims. Now, the difficulty about it is that it suited the Commission that other countries would come in and start demanding extra tax. Because that meant that Ireland was left with few friends when other people around the table thought there was a windfall due to them. So from a public relations point of view, the Commission was very clever in the presentation, and it seems to me now they're rowing back from that position. But what they wrote is what they wrote, and what they put in the report is what they put in the report. There's another trap as well, which I'm sure you've seen. If a country in continental Europe was to pursue a claim that they were entitled to part of the 13 billion because tax should have been paid in their jurisdiction, which accrued to Ireland subsequently, well, aren't they opening themselves up then to a similar state aid inquiry? Because if they didn't collect the appropriate amount of tax from Apple in their jurisdiction, isn't that the very essence of state aid?
So you dispute what the Commissioner has said to us explicitly in this meeting earlier this week, that the large majority of the money is owed to Ireland, in her opinion, and in the Commission's opinion is owed to Ireland. You dispute that. Is there a basis for disputing it?
No, I'm not disputing it. I'm simply saying that the assertion that there could be third country claims to the 13 billion, if that's the figure, was much stronger on the day the decision was made in late August, and was more emphatic in the press statement that accompanied. But it was also reflected in the full report when that was published in December. What I'm saying is that the Commissioner is now putting a lighter emphasis on that. But she may have had further information around that issue. As you say, if France and Germany have already said they're not entering claims, that may have reinforced her opinion that it's not a big issue. But my point is, it was made a big issue initially.
But can we take it off the table now if you're not refuting what she's saying?
Take it off the table because the Commissioner didn't take it off the table. The Commissioner has said that there is a possibility that countries who believe that Apple didn't pay sufficient tax in their jurisdiction could make a claim against the escrow account of the 13 billion when this is all resolved, if that's the way it goes. And we can't take it off the table because we'd probably be subject to legal proceedings if that's the way it goes.
Okay, so but it's still going to be left there.
There's a mix of tax law and politics being operating here, which I don't like what the Commission did. I think you gathered that.
Can I also ask you around what the Commissioner said? They were investigating 1,000 tax rulings offered by European governments to companies concerning the amount of tax they owed. She also confirmed that there was no further open investigations into tax arrangements in Ireland or elsewhere. Does that not prove that the investigation into Apple's operation here was not an attempt to get at Ireland's corporation tax through the back door, but rather that it just happened to involve one of the world's biggest companies? Do you accept her verdict in that?
Well, I accept the information she gave. I mean, I worked with Margarita when she was Danish finance minister for 3 years. And when we had the presidency, I worked closely with her on banking union because there were particular issues in banking union in Denmark because they were outside the Eurozone, and yet, you know, there was going to be a banking arrangement which would apply across the European Union. So I have no personal antipathy to her. I think she's a good commissioner. I think she's an effective person. But I disagree with the decision that was made. And that's the issue. And we're appealing it in the courts, and we'll let the courts adjudicate.
I need to ask you a couple of other questions. How much has been spent on the appeal to date, and how much has the department set aside for spending on this appeal?
£1.8 million is the figure to date.
And how much do you envisage, or how much has been set aside?
It's not. We haven't. We don't know how long this will last. You know, so it could go maybe 4 years. I'll give you the information I have here. Legal process that could take several years to conclude. Therefore, not possible to provide a comprehensive estimate of expected further expenses at this time. The case has involved a significant degree of legal and technical complexity, and additional expertise has been engaged where required. It's an important issue for the state, an important issue for Ireland, and the case will continue to be appropriately resourced. But, you know, it's 1.8 million, but the other figures are billions, so, you know.
No.
There isn't an equivalent.
So talking about billions now. I want to ask you as well. Obviously, when revenue are setting out taxation for indigenous companies, they have a strict methodology that they use for that. Was there a methodology used for Apple and for other multinational companies?
You know, it's very hard to be absolutely certain of the detail in retrospect. I mean, the first opinion was 1991, and 1991 is 25, 26 years ago. And you may recall, if you have done some research into corporation tax, that Apple came in the 70s, but right through the 80s, like other exporting companies, it had export sales relief. And export sales relief meant that exporting manufacturing companies paid zero tax. So under Irish law, no manufacturing company that was exporting paid tax, and this was an exemption given by the European authorities under state aid rules. So, you know, they manufactured in the 70s right through the 80s, principally in Cork, and they didn't pay tax because that was the agreement. Export sales relief. It was only around 81 then that Apple began to come into the tax net, and it was at that point that they looked for an opinion of what their tax liability would be under the new rules. And if you trace it through the 90s, first of all there was a 10% rate, I think, which applied to manufacturing industries that were exporting, and then there was a case that ran all the way to the Supreme Court. I think it was McCann's, the banana people. They asked to define the machine turning bananas to ripen them on the other side as a manufacturing activity, and they won their case. So as a result of that, I'm speaking from memory now, so don't take this as a legal opinion, but this is the story. It was extended then to all manufacturing companies, and manufacturing was defined very, very widely. Like it included like packaging, for example. I mean, putting tea in tea bags would have been within the exemption, or as I say, mechanically turning bananas over to ripen them. So when you're trying to get a fix on what actually happened in 91, there's a totally different context under Irish tax law. but the revenue are absolutely categoric that the methodology they used was fully in accordance with Irish law.
And just
since
to ask you, yeah, because my time will be going, and we will
since tax is a sovereign competence, it's Irish law that applies in Irish tax cases, and the revenue applied Irish law. Now there's a retrospective run on it now. There was another opinion in 207. 207 is a long time ago as well.
Yeah, Minister, do you think, and just finally, do you think that it's right that as a government we allow companies like Apple to set up phantom companies with no employees, no assets, nothing whatsoever, in order to... Did that not ring alarm bells, or does that not ring alarm bells as to why a company would do that? And is there something in legislation that we can do to stop that happening? Yeah,
multinational companies structure themselves in different ways, and some of the structures are quite complex, and it doesn't just apply to Apple. In Ireland's case, the legal advice and the opinion of the revenue was that only the profits generated from economic activity in Ireland were taxable, and Apple paid the full 12.5% on the profits made on the economic activity in Ireland. The two companies then were non-resident companies, and the opinion of the revenue would have been that the profits made in non-resident companies were not amenable to Irish tax. They were amenable to tax back where the parent companies were in the United States. And the assumption was that while Apple didn't pay tax on the profits which were accrued to the United States, they did have a tax liability at 35%. But that tax liability would only be crystallised into tax paid if the profits were repatriated to the United States. So, there was no attempt by the Irish authorities to open gaps or doors or anything else for Apple. And we were very surprised that several years later, there's a retrospective reach now by the Commission in a way they'd never done before. And that's what we're appealing.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy Premier.
Long enough. Thank you, Minister.